Welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us on the CCA California podcast. Tony, what's up? How are you?
Oh, I'm chilling. This has been a very fun week for us, Chris.
Yeah. Fun indeed, for sure. Fun but busy.
Oh, really very busy. Very busy. But that's what makes it fun, right?
Yeah. We have a lot of show stuff, a lot of star stuff. It's gonna be epic. But I've been looking forward to this episode for quite a while. We've got two great friends of mine. We've got Joey and Scott from Tady Lures. Welcome to the podcast, guys, or welcome back, I should say.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
And before we confuse people, I don't work for Tady Lures.
I mean, you might as well.
Tell them to put me on the yeah.
We put them to work, all right.
Yeah. Well, Scott, you've had some big news for the last, I feel like it's been 20 years. It probably feels like that too, but it's really only been about a year and a half. You have a book coming out.
I do. I'm super excited. Hopefully everybody's coming to PCS to check out the History of Tady Lures. It's actually called A History of Tady Lures right now. So hoping one day it gets to be called The History of Tady Lures.
Nice. There's always time for that.
Second edition.
Yeah, second edition. And then the third edition. And then keep going from that.
I think there's going to be books in between this one and the second edition, but we'll see.
Okay. Cool. Well, before we get any further down the road, Joey, you've got quite the history with Tady Lures and your family and all that stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, my grandfather started the company, around the early 60s. And this is essentially kind of after he retired. He got out of internment camp, started working again, did a lot with mechanics, being a mechanic, and started eventually getting into real estate. And when he retired from, I believe, the real estate game, he started his fishing lure company. And this all started in the backyard, like most fishing lure companies or small businesses, especially in those days. It started in the backyard. We were using materials that essentially recycled materials from our rental buildings. So the first ones were flat metal. They're just basically stamped brass or stamped steel. And a lot of that material came from the downtown 4th Street building. Back then it was a motel. And they had brass strap or steel strap on all the ledges of staircases.
Oh, okay.
To keep, once those got worn out, we would take those, cut them, stamp them, bend them, put hooks and rings on them, and that's kind of how our first, Tady Lures were made.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
The jig that started it all right there, the first flat metal right there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool.
Pretty cool. We found advertising. The first advertising I found was from 1966 Western Outdoor News, and that's in here as well. And they actually call the lure a dart wig lure. But we also found a bunch of placards, and they call it dart wigglers. So we actually don't know what the first name of the first jigs are. So pretty cool.
Oh my gosh. Joey, when Scott first came to you with this idea about writing a book about your family history, the jigs, I mean, what was going through your mind?
It was, Scott's the first person to ever really offer that or mention about a book. And we, honestly, we always felt like, well, is it, it's a lure brand. It's just, it's a family business. It's, it's something we've done for many years. It's kind of, it's our passion.
Joey doesn't realize the cool stuff he has at the warehouse. Like I was walking by and there's a briefcase that says Tady on it. I'm like, oh, that's dope. And he's like, dude, that's been there for, I'm like, no, the community, like that's Tady's briefcase right there. Like that's cool. And he just lives with this stuff. So it's not historical to him because it's his everyday job. Whereas all this stuff in there to me are artifacts and primary documents of our history. The story had to be told.
Oh my gosh. I mean, other than that, like what made you want to just dive into this project?
So I am a history teacher. Went to college they trained you in how to do history, although I'd never done it. I joked with him for probably a year or two.
At least.
I'm going to do a history book on Tady one day. And we even were at sushi one time, and I planned out the whole thing. We were in the back of his truck with another guy, and I'm like, okay, you're gonna fund it, you're gonna help me, and I'm gonna write it, and this is how we're gonna do this thing. And I was totally joking at the time. And he had always told me there's a guy by the name of Dan Fink, and most people in the community know Dan Fink. He was his Joey's dad's best friend. And he'd always said, let's see if there's a camera on. So this is Dan Fink, a hunting picture with the whole family and Dan Fink.
Wow.
And so he had always said, you know who you need to talk to is Dan Fink. He has all the family stories and everything. And so we'd always kind of said, oh, we'll do it one day. And then not this past November, but the previous November, he passed away. And so Joey called me. There's even a line here that says, when an old man dies, a library burns to the ground. And so he has all the stories I need. And so when Joey called me and said, hey, he passed away, and the first words were, well, if we're ever going to start the book, this is the sign. And so at that point, I kind of started, but it wasn't until a year ago, February, that I actually started and got a team in place and started really working on this. And every single night, every single Saturday at some swap meet or something like that, every Sunday interviewing all the legends. So about 8 months to write the book.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing this was the first book you've ever written, right?
Yeah.
How was it like? I mean, what was that whole experience?
I just gave him his copy last night, and I wrote in there, like, writing a book sucks. Writing a book with your best fishing buddy sucks, still sucks, but at least you have somebody to like complain about things. Initially, you know, if you look at like the Bite Sport Fishing, their magazine, like how it's kind of cool photos and whatever, that was my original idea, to just do, you know, 50, 100 pages at the most, like magazine style. That's not what we ended up with. Like hardcover, 356 pages, coffee table book. Like I ended up going full geek all the way down the rabbit hole. So, but that's kind of what I do with things. Like if I'm going to do it, it's going to be all the way.
Wow.
Well, I'm sure, like, as you came across all these, you know, artifacts in Joey's house and warehouse, I'm sure it kind of caused you to go, well, where did that come from? How did that originate? How did we get how did it go from A, this is step D? Like, I want to find out those little steps in between.
Yeah, and I even have a page in here. It says my wanted list, and I still have questions that I never figured out the answers to. Jigs from the 80s, there's one called a Tady Mike. I don't know who Mike is. So, like, solving all these puzzles was part of the deal, and interviewing old guys and trying to come up with these answers, it was a lot of fun.
That's cool. So basically there's a section in the book that you just showed where it's like, hey, I still need info on this stuff.
I still didn't find, there's actually a jig in here where I just drew a picture of it, like, because I don't have one. We have the mold, we know that it exists, but I never found one. So there's one jig I never found, a few for the book that I had to borrow from guys like Steve Carson and other people like that, to Danny Moon and Rick Olfinger let me borrow some jigs, and I couldn't find them all. So I'm still on the hunt.
Oh my goodness. I have to ask, how many rabbit holes did you have to go through with this whole process?
Yeah, rabbit holes are great though. Like, to me, rabbit holes are passion. Like, and I don't want a rabbit hole that ends. I want one that just keeps going forever. And this kind of stuff does keep going forever. And when you find the right old guy that has all the Western outdoor news from the 1960s, and he says, yeah, come over, you can look at them all. And you start finding Tady ads from the 60s, like that gave me a charge. And so you keep going. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Out of the whole 350 pages, Joey, I would say, did he get pretty much everything, or is there still plenty of stuff to do, or to write about?
Well, there's always more to talk about. I don't know if it could go in the book, but there's always more to talk about. You know, but the interesting thing that I found with this book is Scott, with his research, has found so many new things relating to Tady Lures, relating to the family, that I've never seen. You know, I didn't know that it was possible to get internment documents, you know, from the war. Those things I've never seen. I don't think my family has ever seen those things. Wow. And so, you know, again,
I was able to find 99 internment documents from his grandfather.
No kidding.
Including his whole story about, like, he went to Santa Anita, the racetrack, and he was held there for a while. So here's some of the documents right now. The cool one right here is that before there was Tady Lures, there was the Hollywood Tady Garage, because he was a mechanic. And so, like, that's awesome. Yeah. His name's Tadasso, for people who don't know. His nickname was Tady. And so that's where the Tady brand is born, like in a garage. He was a mechanic. So all that stuff's documented. He broke a shoelace in camp one time, and documentation from the military needs new shoelace. Like I have 99. It's crazy everything they wrote down.
Oh my gosh, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. And when, Scott, when was that? When were those documents? Obviously, during the war, but
Oh yeah, so
mean,
they're all from the 40s.
from the 40s.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing. That's
Well,
amazing.
and 42 is the first one because that's when the camps opened. And the cool thing that Tadasso does that's really smart is he puts all of his mechanic garage, all the parts, he puts it in storage. And when the war is over, and it is so during the war, he's actually applying to get out of the camp and go and help the country by being a mechanic. He wanted to go to Denver. He ended up in Chicago. All these people write him back and say, we want you here, we'll pay you $30 a week. And so all these people are writing letters for him to get him out. He's writing letters to try to get out. And just a couple months before the war ends, he obviously didn't know that at the point, they did let him out. And so he was working the last couple months of the war.
Huh.
And it's all in the documents.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is turning into more than just a book about jigs. This is
It's family.
legit history.
Again, to me, I even put in some of my favorite primary documents. So as a fisherman, there's World War II documents that are like included fishing. So I have one here, don't be a sucker, keep your mouth shut. And it's a fish not biting the hook. I included everything from my history side and from his family side. And of course, the Tady Lures side and all the jigs.
Right. I mean, having a skill set like yours where you can write a book like this one and all that, and being able to kind of mold that with something that you're super passionate about, fishing, and Tady too, that's got to be just an unbelievable experience.
It was fun. To me, the favorite part, like going to the garage sales and finding a lure that you've been looking for, like that's like finding the artifact, because that's what it is to a historian, right? Like these are the things we use to tell history, and finding the one you're missing and then trying to find the story about that and then connecting a document. So a lot of the jigs in here, like let's take the Tady 9, came out in 1981. I know that because all the magazines say new product alert and you get to read about it, and it was shaped from a 9.0. So the whole story of if I could find a document to go with that jig, kind of that's how I tried to tell the story. I tried not to use words. So if you actually look at the beginning of the book, it's like kind of black and white to go from there. And so I try to use documents and jigs to tell the story without my words. And then I end the very end by going to color, because it's kind of like it starts in the 60s and ends with today. So there's little things like that
That's a
people
cool touch.
probably won't catch that that I tried to take you on a journey, but not with my words, with the jigs.
Yeah.
Well, it's the evolution.
100%.
Yep. That's exactly it.
Did, when you went on these, I'll call them, I guess, excursions or whatever, to go talk to people, go see their jigs and all that stuff, did you come across quite a bit of people that just really didn't even know what they actually had in their garage?
All the time. We were doing something last night, and a guy goes, "Oh, I got these," and I'm like, "Oh, those are rare." He's like, "I didn't even know." So there's going to be, I think this book is going to cause a lot of people to go back and dig through their jigs, and that'll be fun for them. I never want it to be like a price guide or like a catalog, but it's going to end up being like a collector's guide. Like a guy's going to go, "Whoa, I didn't know there was a Tady BL or a Tady B4 or whatever." Like now I'm going to be on the hunt for that.
I was just about to say, you're kind of lighting everyone's kind of fire to go find these super rare jigs already.
Yeah, and for a lot of the old guys, they all looked at me like, "Tady, that's not even an old company, Like, what about the ones from the 50s? So, like, there's other jigs out there. But I was lucky that Joey gave me, like, and it took probably a little while, because at the beginning, I'd tell myself, okay, only send him one text today. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, I'm like, I can't. So I just started sending him like 10 a day. And like, I could tell there's some days where he just ignored me. Like not writing him back today. I'm too busy. And I totally understood that, because he has a business to run.
Right.
And I would get a story from someone, but then I need to verify it. And so I had my like group of guys, him being one of them. And a lot of times he'd be like, "No, that's not the way it went down." And he'd give me a little hint. And then ultimately I'd find out from another guy, and I'd start to create the story by like checking with other people.
Right. Joey, there's got to be some stories that you probably have never even heard about that Scott came across.
Well, there's stories. There's always a ton of stories, and half the time I'd come back to the shop. That's more so like after Fred Hall shows. We get a lot of gentlemen coming up. Hey, where's your dad? I'd like to see him. Or, we did this together back 20 years ago, and this and that. And I'd ask my dad, hey, this guy over here said he knows you. He worked at the shop, and he goes, well, I don't know, I've never seen that guy in my life. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, it seemed like he worked at the shop and this and that. And he goes, well, it must have been when I wasn't there, maybe I was in the service. But a lot of times it's tough verifying a lot of these things, because a lot of this stuff happened a minimum of 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago. I'm almost 40, and half, I shouldn't say half, but we found so many lures that I didn't know existed. I mean, me and Scott spent over 20 hours, in my shop looking at tens of thousands of jigs that haven't seen the daylight in
one day we
30
did
or 40 years.
We did 12 hours, 9 to 9, and we did 60,000 flat metals. And we knew this because it was written on each box how many was in each side. And that was to come up with the list of flat metals. There was no list that existed of every Tady lure, every flat metal, all that kind of stuff. And so, but to me, those were exciting days, because we'd be going through all these bags, and then all of a sudden you'd get one that was rusty, and we'd look at each other like, oh, this one was used. And then you'd get inside, and there'd be like one jig that didn't belong there, and we'd still have the knot on it, and you're like, oh, 100%, this is Tadasso's jig. He just came back and like put it here. So to me, it was like archaeology. It's Indiana Jones. I'm in the Tady warehouse going through boxes that haven't been gone through and since the 80s, so it was fun.
Yeah, it was almost like a time capsule. I remember putting all those jigs away and labeling all the boxes and doing that 30 years ago. I remember doing it and thinking, oh man, this is a ton of work. I'm covered in dirt and dust. We're getting, cut by the hooks that are rusty. And I remember in my head just, oh my God, why am I doing this? Like what, this is tough, and not liking it. But, that's what my dad told me to do. He goes, because he didn't want to do it, so he made me do it. We went through literally tonnage of lures, and I put them all away. And it was a tough day. I remember it was more than a day. It was days to do that. And that was 30 years ago, and that's where it sat. And the funny thing was, when we went through it, I was kind of dreading it, because I'm thinking about the past, but it turned into an adventure. That was the neat thing about it, was it kind of started 30 years ago. So, oh man, it's kind of almost a negative thing. But going forward 30 years, it was finding history. It was just finding, all these lures that haven't been made, haven't been seen, and it's all new to me,
If we would have filmed that day, because it was literally like we're opening boxes and going, oh, like if we would have filmed that, like it would be the most viewed film, like for the fishing community, just because we're going through all this stuff. And of course, a bunch of guys would have loved to have been in the room with us when we were doing that.
And we had hundreds of boxes to go through, and it would always be at the very bottom of that one box.
Always.
There's something, the top would be covered with hundreds of flat metal jigs, but on the very bottom, covered, would be a bag of old jigs, Lucky Davids, double A lights, 4.0 lights, 3.0s, and those were some of the things that, without taking the time to do it, we'd never see those. They'd still be in that box. And a lot of those things are, we found they're in this book.
Wow. That's unbelievable. I mean, it's almost like a kid in a candy store.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could see.
It was better.
It was
better than that.
It was better than candy.
If you're into jig fishing, and especially, old jigs,
right.
This would have been the creme de la creme. It would have been at the top, because thousands and thousands of jigs.
And so this is last February. We had 2 days where we did this, a 12-hour day and like a 10-hour day. I mean, we're talking you go in clean and you come out completely like just head to toe black. So at that point, I still didn't know how much Joey was into the project. I still felt like I was annoying him. And here I am like at his factory for 12 hours, right? Like, and he's digging through this stuff. And I kind of told him like, hey, like I'm good. And he's like, no, I'll help you, that kind of thing. So we got to a point where these boxes, somebody had to crawl in this hole to go get it, and whoever was crawling in there was going to come out not
black.
It was not something. So I went forward and he blocked me, and he went in, and I said, oh no, you shouldn't be doing that. And all of a sudden I go, oh, he's in, like he's fully in, like he is digging right now. And at that point, I didn't have an owner of a company that was letting me look at their stuff. Like I had a research partner that was like excited about the book, so that was cool.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
One of my favorite jigs that we found at the bottom, and this shouldn't have been in this section, was this yellow jig right here. And so this was found in the flat metal section. And so we would open up bags and suddenly there'd be old 45s or old this or that. So that was my favorite find of them all, that old yellow jig that
No kidding.
somebody in the family used a long time ago, and somehow it ended up packed away with the flat metals.
Wow, let me touch on that before, because I remember you telling me stories for the last year or so about how photo shoot here and all that stuff. Really, just capturing all these jigs in photography and all that. That was a whole step by step process, right?
Yeah, and I screwed up, and I made lots of mistakes on this book, but they're all learning mistakes. I'm ready to do the next one. Like I know how. I got a team in place. So I was initially taking all of them with my phone. And I was looking at the phone afterwards. I'm like, they're not popping because these are art, Like if you see the book, they're all color, full page jigs, all that kind of stuff. Like they're art. And so I made the decision this November previous. It was in the summer to hire a photographer. But what happened is I had to go back to all the people who I'd taken photos in their garage. I had met Steve Carson in Oceanside parking lot, and he let me take some photos. He ended up putting them all in a box and sending them to me. Dave Rader did the same thing. So all of the guys that I initially took photos from, they all had to give me their collections, which was also for me and for them. Like a lot of them looked at me like, dude, this is you can't find this jig. This is very personal to me. So all those guys trusted me, and they all got their jigs back, thank God. But 2 days with a photographer, and this is like August, I think. We did 2,000 photos. The first day was 10 hours in his warehouse where I sat there and I put one at a time jig. She clicked, I took the jig off, and we went through 2,000 jigs like that. And then the very next day was in my garage, because most of the jigs in the book are either from the Tady collection or they're mine. If they're not, they give credit, Frankie Garcia, Gio, Nico. So the people in the community that let me borrow stuff, they've all been credited here. So it's kind of cool to see their names. Yeah.
That's very cool.
But 2 days after that, there's no way I could have done a third day. My lower back was so fried from bending over and putting a jig down, her going click, and me taking it off and just doing that 2,000 times. So yeah, it was a lot.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the book, I have to say, if I haven't told you this already, it turned out phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was, it just looks, the cover is fantastic. It's just great. I know you've been kind of teasing it on social media. But yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I did not hold back. This book probably shouldn't be 356 pages if I had an editor or if I wasn't a complete, down the rabbit hole. Yeah. You'd cut 100 pages out so you could actually make money on it. But even if you open it up, terry cloth gray, I also did gold leafing. So it's got everything you would put on a jig if you were trying not to make money, or a jig on a book if you were trying not to make money on it.
This looks like a staple that if you fish, whether you're a jig fisherman or not, this is a book to have that will last generations.
And that's ultimately why I went from a magazine to this. Everybody in the community kept going, dude, we need a coffee table book, a big thing that we can all put in our tackle rooms, we can all put on the boat. Every tackle shop should have one. Every boat should have one. Every man cave should have one. So ultimately, that's what you ended up with.
I was just about to say, you've called it a coffee table book before. at least with me and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And it really, I don't know, in my opinion, it's much more than that, though. It really is.
I hope so. Yeah.
Look at, oh, that's cool.
I mean, some of the coffee table books I have at home, like the Laura Sport Fishing, it was like one of the first like edition copies, you know, and
Right.
it looks old, but it's a book that we never want to get rid of.
I still got mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those books that, like I said, you want to be able to pass it down.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, so with this book, when people buy it from you, I think they're going to get a jig, right?
Yeah, so I can turn to the story of Lucky David. So Joey and I spent several weekends at 22nd Street Landing, and we took a bunch of Tady lures, Tady 10, Tady 8, Tady 13, a 2A, all lures that people haven't seen before, like not of my generation. And we tested them all. And ultimately, we started testing the Lucky David, and I'll tell that story in a second. And so we first thought we were going to go with the Lucky David 13, and then we came back the following day and started with the Lucky David 12. And that's the one that we ended up settling on. So every book is going to come with a Tady Lucky David 12.
Nice.
And it's going to come in this paint job, which if you look at the front of the book, that's an old 4.0 right there. And so we kind of copied that paint job. And so another little thing of the book starts with that, and then the very last page is the jig that you're getting. And so the book starts that way and it ends that way. And so that's kind of like the completion of the story as well, telling a story without words. So yeah, we loved how this jig swam. And so it's kind of cool we always wanted to do something else with the book to celebrate it, like bring back an old jig. And so with Joey's help, we brought back the Tady Lucky David 12.
Nice. So that was always part of the plan to actually offer a jig. With
Yeah,
the book.
and talk about an idiot. Who writes their first book, 365 pages, and also decides to make a lure for the first time ever. And so all it's been is and I've never done production. I've never done any of this kind of stuff. So I've learned a lot, but it's also every day there's been a new problem to solve, in trying to get this thing set up for PCS.
I mean, how and why did you decide on this Lucky David?
So there's actually some really smart fishermen, Danny Fitzgerald, guys like that are actually still fishing the Lucky David 12. And so when we saw it, we're like, we got to bring back something old, something that people don't know about. The Lucky David story is pretty cool. So if you don't know who Lucky David is, his name is Dave Rudin. He was friends with Tadasso. They fished together a lot. He was a plumber, heater, something like that. And he was carrying something up some stairs, and he tripped and fell, and it landed on him, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. My research says at that point he either turned over production to Tady, or Tady buys the company from Dave Rudin. And so Joey even said, I don't remember my dad ever telling me this story, but clearly if you look at the lures, they go from being called Lucky David. So we have a Lucky David. I don't know if we can see that here. Where it just says Lucky David. And then what it starts to go to is you get Tady Lucky David, or you even get some that say just Tady stamped on the back, but it's a Lucky David. So Steve Carson even remembers, he was in the Big Five office, and he remembers when Tadasso came in and said, hey, I've got this new lure, and he was talking about a Tady Lucky David 13.
Oh, kidding.
Yeah. So Joey and I went and tested a bunch. We decided that these two right here, these are original. You can see this one says Tady Lucky David 12, and on the back it has a Tady stamp. So that was one way they did it. And then they also had this way, which was Lucky David 12 with a Tady stamp on the back here. And so we actually made both versions for my booth. So we have this one, Lucky David 12 with the Tady stamp, and then we have this one, the Lucky David with the Tady right there. So both of you're not going to get both of them. You get one of them.
One or the other.
What's cool too is Joey actually modernized one of them, and he stretched it and made it. So this one is more like a C. The 12, the true 12 is like a C, right. But he stretched this other one, and it's more like a 45, more for the modern stuff we're throwing. So really cool. And it was fun to be. To me, we were at 22nd Street Landing every day. The captains came out with us, the deckhands, and everybody was testing. We also, when we got these back from the factory, we have a charter to Cedros every year, And so the everybody got one, and everybody tested them. Everybody loved them. They caught a lot of fish, and so we're like, game on, time to put this thing into production.
Joey, from your perspective, how cool is all this?
It's beyond cool. It's the process of doing it all is way far beyond what I was thinking originally, and good and bad.
Come down the rabbit hole with me, Joey.
It was
What's that phrase? Misery loves company.
Yeah. He would tell me a lot, like, "Ooh, I don't know if we could do this in time." Like he said this to me all the time, and I'm just like, "No, what are you talking about? We can do it. We can do it." Like, but clearly he had the experience that I did not have.
Well, a lot of people just make a jig and just go for it, and it's like, well, it takes a lot. And this project in particular, most jigs are, whether they're made from aluminum or zinc, the processes of making them are very similar. Doesn't matter the shape, all the processes have to be done from A to Z. And this particular jig, though, we had issues. It was difficult. It was more difficult than I was anticipating. And a lot of it had to do on the production side. But, again, it's not problems, I would say, difficulties, yes, but that kind of makes it's a learning process. And that's the time and effort that we are willing to put in to make a good product. And, I think it's a good product. And, we tested it. We had a lot of people along us, who are, we had Mike Morrison from 22nd Street, Brian Burrell come down, take a look at it. And all of those guys gave us our input on what they felt, how they thought it was a good jig. And they all enjoyed it.
When an opportunity like when this book comes out and when people see you testing out their jigs and everything, does it often remind everyone else about their own Tady stories or stories of a jig that they once had or whatnot?
Sure. Well, we just did the Bart Hall show recently in Long Beach, and we had so many people come up to us and tell us their Tady story. We met Scott met my insurance rep, who his father was taking care of our insurance for my grandfather.
Wow.
This is how long ago the relationships go. And we met a gentleman from Mammoth who's a trout guide, and I guess he brought us a lure that we apparently didn't see before.
It's not in the book. He brought us a flat metal that was a Tady B, and I'd never seen one before. So
Wow.
there are jigs out there probably that I didn't find in 8 months.
That was going to be my next question. Are people, or like for example with the Long Beach show and all that, did you experience people coming up to you and actually contributing to maybe not this book but the next book?
I had 4 or 5 guys say, "Oh, I've got the one you're missing. I've got this." I gave them all business cards. So people were excited. And for a lot of them, it's their childhood.
Yeah.
They were excited because this was my childhood. And now you're bringing back all these things that remind me of when I was a kid. And that's the collecting side for a lot of people. But it's also, we love to relive when we were kids fishing.
Yeah.
Great memories.
I mean, it's unbelievable to think about, to where if you have people that are above our generations and everything and all that, and they come to you with their own stories, and you're already, the content almost writes itself for the next book.
I already told all these people, because I was taking notes on some of them. I'm like, second edition, this has to go in, like new story I didn't know about. So I assume one day there will be a second edition. And even I put my email in the book, and I put in there, "Guys, I wrote this way too fast, 8 months. I missed jigs. I made mistakes. I want you to correct me. I want you to email me and say, hey, you didn't know this story," or "Hey, you missed this jig." Like, I'm looking forward to people, might be a little bit hard on my ego, but looking forward to people sending me and saying, "Hey, like, this is something you missed," or "Here's a photo of Tadasso with, and including that in the next one."
Yeah.
Well, something I've always been curious about when it comes to these types of surface irons is, you walk into a tackle store and the Tady shape and the body, it's such an iconic shape. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it swims." Or they can look at it and they know that it swims. But the first model that you showed, that Wiggler or the Wiggle Lure, it didn't look like what we see in the tackle stores today. So right. I was wondering if you guys can talk about where and how that original kind of lightning bolt-esque shape came from and who decided, oh yeah, this will swim. I can chuck this out 50 yards and it'll swim.
Tadasso had actually designed lures his whole life. Like as a 12-year-old kid, he couldn't afford certain things, so he was making lures and stuff like that. So he'd always been doing something. But you're right, like he's an innovator in the way that other guys were making sandcasts at that time, you know, candy bar was out, all that kind of stuff. Like to come out with this lure was something that nobody else was doing. So talk about like an innovator, like somebody we should be looking back on and saying, oh, this guy brought something totally different to the game.
Yeah. Well, and in those days, money was tight. I don't think anybody was wealthy in those days. So you had to take things that were available to you and recycle those. So you took what somebody would call trash, basically strips of stamps of steel or brass, and repurpose that into a fishing lure. We couldn't go out and buy metal. Why would you buy metal when you have it sitting here in your motel that you're not using? Recycle it.
Well, and anybody coming out of the Depression learned to reuse everything. Nothing went to waste. So you could see that thread in his grandfather that like, oh, we're using that. Oh, we're using that. Even when we go through the warehouse today, he's like, oh, I threw away a ton of stuff. Like all these guys have been saving for all these years. What am I saving it for? But that's a different generation that held on to everything. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. Again, I've had to throw away things, and, it's been sitting in our warehouse it went from downtown LA to, Bell Gardens, and then now to our current shop in City of Industry. It's been to 3 different shops over 50, 60 years. And sometimes we haven't touched it. And I said, you know what? Let's get rid of it. We're done with it. Let's get rid of it. The following week, I literally need it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is one of those instances where you just can't throw away things.
Yeah.
So for those of you watching, here's all 3 buildings. So I found 3 original of the first building. There's the second building, and there's the current building. I also did something cool. I found all of their business cards, and I did like a family tree, like an ownership tree of who owned the company with business cards. So
that's cool.
Lots of fun stuff in this book, like lots of little things like that I think people will trip out on.
I was going to say, what makes you think about all these little unique details, like collecting business cards? Who would have thought about that?
I was dreaming about this book for like it was something that when it's in your head like that, and you're like, okay, how am I going to display this? Speaking of business cards, we went through his dad's safe and we found like his business card Rolodex, and it's all the old legends. So I put in all their business cards. I crossed out their phone numbers. There we go.
Oh, I was going to say.
Yeah. So I put in like all the business cards that his dad had saved for all these years, and you can probably recognize some of the
Spirit of Adventure.
big
Wow.
names. Bob Taft.
Oh my goodness.
Zuckers.
Longfin is in there.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Pretty cool.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, Scott was spending a lot of time at the shop, and he'd find something that is interesting, and I'm like, oh man, it's not a big, I've seen that thing for my whole life, and it's not a big deal, but
like the briefcase.
Right.
The briefcase, it didn't make the book, but ultimately, when you walk around that place, there's stuff that he just thinks is regular, like everyday stuff, but that the community is dying to see.
Yeah. Huh.
One thing you were talking about jigs earlier, and so to me, and I don't know if people will pick this up in the book comes full circle at the end. So we talk about like his dad being one of the great jig shapers. In fact, Tadasso always said that Jimmy was one of the best guys at shaping a jig. When Joey brings back a jig, so he's done this multiple times. He's done this with the 14A, the 4.0, the 4.0 Senior. Like when he brings back an old jig, and I don't even know if Joey realized he was doing this, he was always basing it on history, but he was always putting his modern spin on it. So there's always a new tweak to any time he re-releases an old jig, but it's always grounded in history. And to me, that was the book coming full circle, right? So the story ends with him being the new shaper based on the fact that his grandfather, his uncle, his dad have given him all these skills, and now he's taken the business and taken it to a whole new level.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And the other kind of spin that I put on the end is if you think about the flat metals that you talked about, you'd never seen it. to me, isn't that kind of coming back with slow pitch stuff? Like, aren't they pretty similar? Like, I bet you we could start throwing some of these things, and I bet you they'd still catch albacore and yellowfin and stuff like that. So people came to the booth and they're like, oh yeah, I still use a Y2 for yellowfin, or I still use this flat metal. So
Yeah.
people are still using them.
You know, Scott, we've had this conversation a couple different times, but, you know, we had talked about the history, just with anything in general, with fishing, with, you know, I guess U.S. history, whatever. Everything seems to cycle back. We said 50 years typically.
Yeah.
To where,
So if you think about, and we have an awesome community, and it is strictly like Southern California. So for people found out I wrote a book that only people in Southern California are going to buy, they're like, why would you do that? Like, but if you think about post World War II, all the aerospace going into Los Angeles or Long Beach or whatever, all of those engineers are tinkers. These are the same guys, by the way, that are also the hot rodders. Like, so the same engineer is going home and he's working on his car, but there were fishermen going home and working on making lures, improving the reels. And that history to me is now 75 years old, right? If we're thinking about 1950 to where we are today. And that means for some of it, it's gone. You know, that early stuff from the 50s, like even this book, there's questions I had from the 80s that I could not find an answer to, and I'm hoping somebody reads it and sends me an email and knows, oh, I know who Tady Mike is. I know who Walt is, the Tady Walt. So the 50s stuff would be hard to do, and that's why we kind of need to, like, one, support these projects. The Inside Sport Fishing one, I'm super excited for. And if this one sells, I'll start on another project, but usually history takes about 50 years before people are ready to tell their stories. I shared with you, if you looked at like the Holocaust in as example, and I'm no way comparing our fishing history to the Holocaust, but those people that come out of World War II were not ready to share their stories for 50 years on the dot. And if you remember the 90s, that's when all the documentaries started coming out about the Holocaust, because suddenly those people were like, I'm ready to like share. Same with the World War II veterans. They didn't talk about any of that stuff forever. And then all of a sudden one day, Band of Brothers comes out. All the cool movies start coming out. And that's because those soldiers were finally ready to talk about it. So we're 75 years in, you know, we got to start saving this stuff and making sure we talk to the old guys and get their stories down.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, because of that, you know, methodology and all that, do you expect more history books to come out about maybe, let's just stick with the fishing industry for right now? Yeah.
So to my knowledge, nobody's ever done something quite like this. So we don't know if it's going to sell. And if it doesn't sell, it'll be the last one you see, because, you know, I have a lot of money into this thing, you know, printing alone, 30,000 plus photographer, the formatter, like you name it, like there's a lot of money into this. So if it sells, yeah, I think there will be, like, I will see other people also think, I want to tell my story. So
yeah,
I'm hoping. I even did a methodology section in here. Like I do, like, hey guys, I can't write all the books by myself. So I write a whole, here we go, history.
Were those pictures of like you going through jigs?
Oh yeah, we did all the behind the scenes stuff.
Oh, nice.
So
That's cool.
At the warehouse.
It said there's a sign that says "Do not take jigs."
That's a cool photo. But then behind the scenes with the photographer, with my formatter, my kitchen sink, like even my house where I wrote the book, like all those photos are in. But the historiography section. So this whole section right here is basically how to write your own book. Like, so I talk about making the list, coming up with the jigs, interviewing people, photo shoot, designing the book. Like, so I kind of do a step-by-step process on all of this. And so, yeah, I don't want it to be a secret. I don't want to be the only one that knows how. If you want to try one of these, read the formula, try it. And I'm definitely around to answer questions. This is one of my favorite photos in the whole thing.
I was going to say, your dog.
So every Saturday morning I was leaving for some parking lot sale or leaving for some place. And I, at this point, had a list of jigs that I was still missing because, you know, I think it's 160 jigs that, if you talk about variations and things, that I'm trying to keep in my brain. So I got down to where I needed like 12 or 15 or whatever. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm getting ready to go to the garage sale thing and I can't find my list. And so I'm looking for my list and I look, my dog has it in her mouth. So even to this day, I put this here. There's it's in my wallet right now. There's a chunk missing out because she did not like this book. Like I was gone way too much. So Arrow, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, this whole thing is so cool, man. It really is. I mean, it's one of those things where you could totally tell. We know each other, but you could totally tell you poured your heart and soul into it for a good solid year and a half at least.
I told Joey last night because somebody thanked me, and I said, what nobody knows is that I didn't write this for anybody else. I wrote it for myself.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to know the history. I wanted a cool catalog, a collector's guide, so that I could keep this all straight. So.
Yeah.
And I think when you follow your heart, your passion, whatever, you just hope that there's other people that see that and buy into it. So I think people will enjoy it, like it, want to buy it, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was always written for me. I was having fun. It was a really fun 8 months to a year. Joey and I became a lot closer friends. That some of those things I wasn't expecting. Some of my best friends now are 80-year-old men. I talk to Wayne Allen every day on the phone.
Nice.
I talk to a guy named Bob Tuttle once a week. The guys down in San Diego. I always get cool phone calls, and I'll look down and it's look at my phone and it says Danny Wade is calling you. Yes,
You made it.
Buzz is calling you. You have an email from Steve Carson. And so for me, not being in the industry but always growing up with those guys as the legends. It's cool to talk to him. The one guy actually, I got on the phone and I heard my voice crack and I was like, what the hell's going on? I talked to Buzz and suddenly, I was nervous. And I wasn't even in front of him. I was on the phone with him. So It was cool, getting their stories. And a lot of them, one, they had to trust me. They had to realize what I was doing was not about money or taking from them or all that kind of stuff. And so once a lot of the guys started trusting me, they were kids. They were telling me their stories of when they were a child, and they were telling me stories of when they met Tadasso, and all of a sudden we're just sitting there talking fishing. And sometimes I forgot to take notes because the story was so good and it was so fun. So yeah, my thank you list on this book is a lot.
The book.
Yeah. So this is the thank you that I wrote is right here, and this is to some special people that were really helpful. But here's all the people that were involved in this thing. So that's a massive list, And if you read them, it's like a who's who of our fishing world. So it was cool to talk to David Schmidt. That's Dave Rader, Dick Schaefer, Rick Ofinger, Danny Fitzgerald, Merritt. We interviewed Taka, Danny Wade, Danny Moon, Danny Erickson. So it's like a who's who of everybody that's in our industry and everybody that helped out. So even keeping that track was hard because so many people would help out and were involved in some little way. So I hope I did not forget anybody's name on that.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah, and a lot of these names mentioned in the book, they have they're not only just captains of iconic fishing boats, but they were personal friends of the family and my father's, so these guys have insight into the company that are valid, they're absolute truths. And, maybe some of these names aren't recognizable to the average person, but believe me that when Buzzy says something, gives you a story about a jig or fishing the day at the docks tournaments, it's truth, and a lot of these things happen 40 years ago, so, and they still remember it, very vividly. So that's the kind of things, I hope the general public can realize that the work that Scott has done to gather the information, over the last year or so, it's very, very time consuming, but he did it with love, and that's the thing. It's not. We call it a lot of work, but you wouldn't do this if you didn't love it.
Yeah.
And
if you guys know Mitch's Seafood,
of course.
So I drove down, I'm 2 hours from San Diego, and I heard that there was a picture on the wall of Tadasso. So I drove down there and I talked to the manager and I told her, I said, can I take a picture of that photo? And she's like, why? And I'm like, I drove 2 hours to see this. She goes, you drove 2 hours for this photo? And I'm like, look, the family doesn't have any photos of him fishing. There's none that exist. This is one of 3 that I know about. And so she was so awesome. She let me take it out of the frame. She went upstairs and scanned it for me. And so, like, to have a cool photo like that.
No kidding.
Alan Fay, famous captain, called him on the
Hey,
phone and he
Fay.
goes, I got a picture. And so I was like, oh, you're 2 hours away. And he goes, well, let me see if I can, scan. So he went to the office, scanned it for me, sent it in an email. This was one of the last photos to go in.
Wow.
And you could see how old this photo is.
Yeah.
So like finding those photos and the stories and talking to Alan Fay, like how cool is that?
Wow.
Yeah, Alan Fay is a great friend of the family for many, many, many years.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Joey, I mean, having an iconic brand in your family, Tady Lures and all that, it's almost kind of like everyone, if you fish and use jig and jig fish in particular, it's like almost everyone has a little bit of a piece of that history of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. All the lures are all handmade. They're made by us. So, especially like the old flat metal jigs, if you know the process of hand bending them, hand cutting them with a hacksaw, a lot of it in the early days there was no machinery. Not that it wasn't available, it's just we didn't have any.
Yeah.
Metal shears, benders, stamping machines. We didn't have all those machines in the early days. All that had to be done by hand.
Wow.
And it's a lot of work. A lot of work. And even a surface iron, but you get it out of a cast, you have to grind it, you have to sand it, you have to polish it, and that's before you even get paint on it.
Yeah.
And heaven forbid it rains in California. There's moisture in the air.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, painting with moisture in the air is way more difficult.
Right.
So there's all these little things that go into making fishing lures that most people don't understand.
Still don't know.
Have you noticed an increase in demand for these jigs over the last handful of years?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit different. The demand for jigs has changed. I wouldn't say the last few years it's more surface iron I should say this. We originated with selling more surface iron than yo-yo jigs. But maybe in the last 10 years or so, maybe 15, we see the increase in yo-yo jig sales. But going forward into the last maybe 5 years with the bluefin showing up, traditionally, our surface iron or yo-yo jigs aren't necessarily a great bluefin jig, but we have slow pitch jigs, we have hybrid jigs. They're made out of lead, and that's what more tuna fishermen are using. So the sales have shifted a little bit, if you will, but it's always just a modernization of what's biting. Barracuda were biting many years ago. Fixed hook jigs. We'd sell tens of thousands of fixed hook jigs, but we haven't had a very good barracuda bite, recently.
Yeah.
So
It's happening this year.
yeah, me and Scott believe that, the barracuda are coming. We went to Cedros last year and it was, I don't know, we must have all caught 100 barracuda. We're all obviously going for calicos
On the
and
fixed
yellowtail.
hook?
Well, just on whatever we threw, it was barracuda. And I hope those barracuda make it up north, and we have a shot at them.
Yeah.
Because if you're a beginner fisherman, barracuda is one of the great fish that you could learn to throw an iron. They pull hard enough. And there's always good action usually.
Well, and the barracuda is an important fish to his family. So I went to pay my respects to his grandfather. We visited his grave, and I almost fell over. His gravestone is a fishing rod with a rod and a line attached to a lure and a barracuda. And I'm
kidding.
oh my God! This is so. 1966 is the year this company kind of comes out as Tady, and that is by most people's accounts the best barracuda year ever. And he is making that flat metal that is a barracuda jig. So whether it was luck or whether he just happened to get in the right time, that year carried this company because he couldn't make them fast enough.
Wow.
For that 1966 year. You did talk about the process. So in the book, I go through the whole sandcast process. So from them making, the prototypes to hand, actually grounding them, from the molds to the tree, to then coming out of the tree, and to where they have this gate. This is a photo of his father actually at the grinder grinding. Initially, they were hand stamped. That would eventually be in the mold. these are some of the prototypes that I found. They would just have either Tady stamped really small on them, or they would have nothing stamped on them. Wow. They also would do paint samples and so a lot of you guys might have jigs that have dates on them or numbers on the back, and that was from Tady, like saying, 1, 2, which one tests best, is this paint holding up, that kind of thing.
Right.
I go through the painting process from raw to they put primer white on everything to then the paint, even the paint booth. We found all the stencils. So how they do that mackerel pattern back in the day, they had a stencil for everything. And so
How
I put all
cool
the
is
stencils.
that?
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't know what people were going to react to at the booth. I had all these old jigs. Every single person walked up and said, "Whoa, is that how they do the mackerel paint?" And I'm like, yeah. So that was like the big hit at the Bart Hall show. So I like this page too. I call it the Jackson Pollock. These were all the jigs that would fall to the bottom of the paint booth, and after a while the paint would just drip, and then like these things were all just stuck to the bottom of the floor, and they ended up with that design on them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and those we don't know how old. Well, some of those are been in there for 15, 20 years at the bottom of the bottom of the paint.
Nobody's
booth
clearing
there.
out the paint booth.
Yeah, right.
Wow. That's unreal.
You
That's
talked
unreal.
about history of these jigs and these companies and whatever. One of my favorite interviews is we went to Matt Salas. We went to Salas the warehouse, and we did an interview with me and Joey. And so, because people always think, oh, Salas and Tady, they must be enemies. No, the families have been friends forever. The Salases made the first tumbler for Tady. So I'm trying to find. There we go. So there's a picture of Matt Salas and Joel Shimizu at his the
Nice.
Salas. So that's cool. And here's a picture of Joey fishing a 7X.
Hell yeah.
So he doesn't just fish Tady Lures. He fishes other.
Yeah,
That's
that's
cool.
funny. What Matt Salas has always been just so, and his father too. They've always just been so friendly to us over the years, and we have nothing but respect for all of them. And it's funny that last photo with me with that 7X. One of the gentlemen, we're on the Independence and we're fishing. That's one of the last. Okay, we're gonna pick. We're picking up and we're heading home. And this one gentleman said, "Hey, I just got this new rod, new reel, and I got this 7X." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." And he goes, "Yeah, but I haven't caught anything on it. I don't think it swims right." And I was like, "Oh, let me see that thing." And it was like one cast and bam, I got one. It's like, oh my gosh. But it's it's fun. And I always tell fishermen, to be a good jig fisherman, you need to have a whole array of lures. You can't just be, I'm only going to fish Tady. No, you need to have some solaces. You need to have some starmans. You need to have, you need to have some kickers. Every one of those jigs has a time and place. It's as the fisherman, you need to know when to use those things. But it'd be foolish to say that the 7X isn't an iconic service siren, or the 6X Junior isn't one of the best yo-yo jigs.
Yeah.
And you need to have them. I mean, the 6X Junior, it works from little tuna or big, all the way up to big tuna, or even fishing wahoo. And again, if you're spending the money to go fishing, why not have a variety of fishing lures? And of course, I would love for you to have the most success on a Tady, and I hope you do. But you know what? There's times when you'll need something else.
When he came and looked at my jig wall, my fishing jig wall, not the collectibles, but the fishing one, and I thought he was going to say, dude, where'd you get all these Taddies from? I was going to be like, uh-oh. But his first comment was, you don't have enough Salas on this wall. I was like, wow, that's the comment he made.
Well, I have a small collection of lures, that I have. And,
Just a small one.
Well, yeah. But, I think I collect them for different reasons than most. I wouldn't say that they're rare, maybe, or very old, but there's certain color patterns that I really like, and I have a section of solace lures, and I kind of pride myself, oh, look at these, this is what I got. And some of my favorite ones I bought at Cedros Island.
Oh, really?
You know, of all things, right? You know,
Yeah.
Cedros Island. You know, I found a couple there, and I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm taking those home.
Yeah, yeah.
I was there for that.
Yeah, Joey, with all this history that we've talked about and all these, you know, the jigs that are out there and all that, do you actually have like a kind of like some kind of a like a history section of the warehouse or anything like that?
Well, you know, I do have I do have like a conference room that we do have a quite a big variety of lures. You know, probably similar to the size of this office right here. You know, we have a pegboard full of jigs. You know, most of it being Taddy's, but you know, there's got to be a couple hundred jigs of, you know, other brands too. And again, I don't necessarily keep them because they're old, but I keep them more to look at the manufacturing process, how they made the bodies, how you know, how big or small of holes did they drill on the jig, what kind of wire did they use, what were their paint patterns, what kind of hooks did they use, was there any downfalls to this jig, you know, durability wise, or you know, what are the positives of certain products. And that's what I look at. I wouldn't call it a, you know, some people call it a museum. It's my personal museum of manufacturing processes is what I look at it as.
And I think what listeners will find interesting, not one Shimizu, one owner ever kept a Tady jig. Like where you and I, Chris, have favorite jigs. Like if we're going fishing, this one is going to be the first one I throw. There is no such thing as that in the family, because if they catch a fish on it, they hand it away. And so Joey doesn't have a favorite. His dad didn't have a favorite. His uncle didn't have a favorite. His grandfather didn't have. To me, that's crazy because all jig fishermen have one or two. Like if things are bad, like this is the thing that's going to be in the water right now.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's a
they get-
confidence booster.
we all have that. We all have that lure. Those guys don't have them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah, we I walk on the boat with a box of jigs, and I usually don't walk off with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
you know, for us jig wise, you know, if we're going sea bass fishing, okay, well, let's grab some white Superman jigs with glow back, maybe have a sidewash hook on it, but you know what, in the end, we have a rack that just has blems on it. You know, we dropped it in the process of painting, and it's got all marks on it or whatever. You know, those are the jigs that we would put in a box to go fishing. You know, and we want, it's, you know, obviously there's nothing wrong with it. It's just cosmetic blems.
Right.
And those are the jigs that we fish with mostly. And 99% of the time is I bring them on the boat. I don't want to bring them home. Yeah, but I want
Wow.
you know, our customers to know that we fish what is available today, and you can buy it from the store today. You know, not this old jig that's from the 60s or 70s that doesn't exist anymore, or a certain color that doesn't exist. You know, we want to fish products that are current, that are modern, and show that it's, you know, these work. You know, it's not just the 1970s lure that you know, your favorite 45, you know, you've had forever. You know, that's what we're trying to portray.
And not
Wow.
just that, you're actually swim testing them. It's not like you're just casting them and putting them up to sell. You're in your team. There's got to be so many of you guys that are out there putting them to work.
Yeah. Well, for instance, like when we developed the Lucky David, you know, we had to learn that this jig swims a little bit slower than, let's say, a modern Starman or a 4.0 Senior. You know, so we've had to adjust, and then watching, you know, other people fish with it, you know, they've had, you know, their style of fishing. So we have to kind of take into account that how fast are people retrieving the lure, or how slow, you know, what's the average? You know, we don't want to make a jig that only swims at a specific speed. It needs to swim at multiple speeds, you know. Because obviously fishing conditions are different every day. We have different wind, we have different current, we have different water temperatures. You know, all those, we have different drifts in the boat. You know, all those things we have to consider in developing a new lure, that we don't want it to be working for only one situation. We want it to work for as many situations as possible and as many fishermen as possible.
Well, and I don't think we announced that the book's coming with this very specific one. But Joey's also releasing a line of Lucky Davids that's going to be at PCS. So
Oh, no kidding.
he's got a few colors over there, and it's going to be a limited run.
Where can we get those?
We'll get those. Scott will have those all available at his booth.
Oh, okay.
at the PCS show.
Will it just be the body, or are they rigged up?
No, they'll be fully rigged. Yeah. You know what's funny is we had a gentleman come up to the show and he says, "This is the best surface iron that I've ever fished with. It's caught more fish than anything." And he actually cut the hooks off and rings and he put it backwards. And he said, this is the best thing ever made. So.
Did he know that it was backwards?
He didn't. Yeah, he just he thought that it's the same on on either end, and the rings were on backwards.
Huh.
So it's kind of strange.
For those of you guys that are thinking about buying, and Joey's going to have them in, the cool one to me is the purple one that hasn't been released in a while, but it's a flat backed. So for those of you that like a flat backed lure, we're used to throwing the concave 45s, but it's also kind of like hippier up here. So for those of you that have been looking for that thicker shoulder jig with also a flat back, like this is going to be your go-to jig for that.
Yeah, so being flat back, what it does is it adds a little bit more weight to the lure while still keeping a little bit smaller profile. So it gives you more weight, and it also allows you to cast in the wind a little bit better. It shoots through the wind better than, let's say, a 45. The 45 they're all concaved, and they end up sometimes cupping in the wind and slowing basically you're not going to cast as far with it. But with something like a Lucky David that's flat back, or any other lure that's flat back, they shoot better through the wind.
Huh.
Well, and they're all old guys that fish a flatback 45.
Sure.
But those things aren't in production anymore. So this is going to be your new flatback 45, flatback C type of it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that change happened from that originally that flat back to the concave?
The flat back, I would, most of the lures in early days were flat backed. I believe we were one of the only ones that made a concave back, and we believe that it added action to the lure. Yeah, the flatbacks. I've personally never liked fishing them. Including the 45. It's just not my jam. I prefer it concaved. But I think it also, you have to slow your retrieve down a little bit. And with modern reels, it gets a little. Sometimes it's a little bit slow for people. And those back then, it was a lot of 4.5s, maybe 5-to-1 gear ratios, but guys weren't burning jigs like they are nowadays. Guys nowadays have high speed reels, and they want to be able to burn it and have that jig stay in the water.
Yeah.
And I get it. So we had to change a few of our things. So we redesigned the C to be a flat back, which in the old days that we had this flat back C. And that was a real popular one. So that'll be a new addition for this year's production. And then we'll have obviously this Lucky David that's flat backed.
Wow. This is so cool.
I can't wait to order this book.
I know.
Cannot wait.
I'm on the pre-order list.
Thank
right?
you. I appreciate it, guys.
Are there any jigs on the table that we need to also visit as well? I mean, you guys brought goodies. Might as well talk about them.
Yeah, at the Bart Hall show, we also, Joey found a box of 77s. The 77 hasn't been in production for a long, long time. That was the last jig his father, who was this epic jig shaper, that was the last jig he ever designed. So there is still a box of those left that'll be at PCS as well. So if you didn't get your 77s at Bart Hall, PCS will probably be the last chance to get new ones.
Yep.
Joey, I feel like your warehouse is like a gold mine. You just find something new every day.
You could find something new every day, and I continuously do that.
Right.
It's it's sometimes hard to find things when you need to find them.
I wore a shirt today from 1980s. This is like one of the
kidding.
original. It's too cold for me, but yeah.
Wow.
I
that's
tried to put
awesome.
on the 80s hat, but it was a little goofy.
Oh, man. Well, guys, this has been fascinating. Thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. Really do appreciate it. One more time, we'll start with you, Joey. How do we get our hands on Tady Lures and all that good stuff?
Well, we have many retailers in Southern California. I always say, support the local shop. They're everywhere. If you can't find one, just give us a call. Tell us where you live, and we'll forward you off to the right dealer.
Nice.
So it's exclusively sold at PCS.
Okay.
And printed 1,000 of them. I'm hoping I sell all 1,000 at PCS and there's nothing to do afterwards, because people said, hey, what if I can't make the show? If I have a few hundred left over at the end, I'll figure out a way to make those available. But yeah, it's going to be a show special. So the book out of the show would sell for $129. I'm going to do $100 at the show, and you're getting the free $20 jig. So it's really $150 value for $100, and there's only 1,000 of them. So
Sign me up.
I'm hoping they all go, because the reality is, like, I want everybody to have them. Like, that's the point of this.
Yeah.
It was never about making money. It was always about writing a book with one of my friends, saving some history, meeting some cool people, owning a bunch of cool jigs at the end of it, and it's time for everybody to see this thing.
Man, that is so cool. That is so. This whole process. I mean, we've talked plenty of times throughout this whole process.
Yes.
Just watching you do it, it's awesome. Congratulations, man.
Thank
Seriously.
you. Yeah. It's a weird thing to go from talking about something to actually, like, boots on the ground doing it. Like, am I doing this?
Having a physical copy.
Yeah. Am I
in
doing
hand.
this? Yeah. No. To actually have this show up at your house and be like, oh my God, we did it. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, definitely after the show, we have to have you both back on, see how the show went, see how the book is. Hopefully, it'll.
All sold out. Hopefully, I'm
sold out.
empty-handed.
Yeah. Then we'll talk about book number 2.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Scott, how do we get in touch with you if we're not at PCS, or how all that stuff?
I'm everywhere. I'm an Iserline Pro staff. I'm a CCA Orange County. You can find me on Facebook, but I'll be at PCS. I'll be next to the Tady booth. So I have my own booth, but I'll be next to the Tady booth, so you can see me at PCS.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Tony, you probably learned a couple things today.
Yeah.
I know I have.
No, I think the whole process has always been extremely fascinating to me. Extremely fascinating. Like, how do you come up with something and decide to chuck it in the water and then kind of shape it so that it swims a certain way, or if it's more lenient towards it swimming to the left, I have to shave this down a little bit, or maybe it's like a hole in the eye. So the whole lure making process to me is always super fascinating topic.
And that story's in here because Tadasso would sit up above the boat and he would watch bait balls. And he would specifically want his jig to break to the left. And all the cuts that he used to put in jigs and whatever, he would watch a bait ball and he would always say that the anchovy that jumped out of to the left got eaten. And he wanted his jig to do the exact same thing. So you're 100% right. These guys were super... There's a story he found. So the first time ever, like, a sardine showed up in the bait well, and he studied it like for an hour. Like, well, already he's fishing. He's just back there looking at it, and there's 2 of them. He grabbed the other one, wrapped it up, put it in a bag, and took it home, and studied that sardine because that's what he's doing, right? So he was all the way down a rabbit hole too.
Wow. All right, Tony, one question from me. Coming off the boat last year, the last handful of years for you and all that, you would just see the Saluses, the Taddies, and all that stuff on the boat. Could you imagine there was so much history behind all those jigs?
No. But you know what? For me, I still feel like I'm relatively new to this San Diego scene, right? You know, if I had been swimming surface iron since I was 10 years old, it might be a little different. You know, so for me, I still feel a little bit like an outsider looking into it, but still equally as fascinated. But I also lived it the last, 700 days or whatever, out on the water. So I definitely put a lot of time into swimming my own and watching people. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen people cast out, and from my own observations of looking at, well, what the current is doing. And like you were saying, to be a good fisherman, it's not just to have your one lure and to cast it out and think you're going to get a fish every time. It's choosing the right lure at the right time when the current's doing what you want it to do, or in certain conditions. It's not just a one-off, one-all thing.
Even the Tady boards, because the 45 would have like 4 blunt nose ones and 4 pointy nose ones. That was specific to the way they wanted it, because they felt like the blunt nose one swam better in current and a slower kicking jig, and the pointy one you could burn faster. So these were all things done on purpose, not on accident. So,
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
like
awesome.
you should see my surface iron. Like, both of ours at home, everything's labeled on the back, like swim slow, or this one cuts to the right, or they're like most of our jigs are like the ones that are really good. We put our own little like mine is a TB with like a star or something. I'm like, these are good. And, we have some that are just like tally marks. We know these are like, they're okay.
And every guy did that. Every garage I went into, I would learn their coding system on the back. And Dick Schaefer did this dot system, and the more dots that were on it, like the better it was. And you'd find one that was all dots, and I'm like, so this is the one I was stealing, right? And he's like, nope, that one's staying here.
So great.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely gonna have to have you guys back again. And good luck with the book, man.
Thank you. I
It's
appreciate
gonna be
it.
awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Tony, another fascinating episode.
We have some phenomenal guests here today.
We do. Well, guys, that is going to be it for this week. Make sure to go follow us on Instagram at CCA California. Make sure to go pick up a copy of Scott's book at PCS. And we'll see you guys there at the show.
Thank you.
Could be cool.
See you there.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys next week. Take care.